Hello everybody! I'm going to start today with a tune. There we go. Thank you. I found my old clarinet from when I was at school. Haven't played it in like 32 years. But I'm glad I haven't lost my magical touch. It's nowhere near Christmas. It's like October. But that's the only tune I know how to play. So, hello. It's nice to see you all. Where are we? I think we're in Devil's Engine Hellraisers. No, we're not. Devil's Engine Hellfighters. We are down in the streets beneath Paris. Where they've stumbled upon, or about to stumble upon, the entrance to the engine, the place where it was built, this vast machine of darkness and doom. And this chapter, I loved writing this chapter. I think it's probably my favourite chapter of the whole series because it's so grim. The Liminal, this is called. Liminal, I love that word. Okay. Pan clung to the edge of the hole, the world around her burning brimstone bright from the flare. She knew she had to drop, but her fingers weren't going to obey her. They knew the truth. If she let go now, then she was going to fall right into hell. "Hey, Pan!" yelled Truck from 15 feet or so below her. "Stop hanging around! We've got to go!" He laughed at his own joke. "Hold on," punned Marlowe. "Give her a chance." "Are you guys insane? Kidding around in this place?" growled Herc. "Besides, you all know she doesn't like heights. It's one of her hang-ups." He snorted, trying to cover it with a cough. She had no idea why they were making jokes. They had breached the outer wall of the engine. They were about to throw themselves into a battle against one of the most powerful entities on the planet. What was funny about that? And yet the sound of their muffled giggles was contagious. The engine wasn't the only thing with defences, she understood. People had them too. Laughter was powerful. It was pretty much the most human thing you could do. Even now, with chips of broken bone and stone digging into her palms, her stomach threatening to cramp, and that god-awful endless idiot chatter of the engine in her head, she couldn't help but smile. It gave her strength, and she let go, her stomach lurching into her throat. She managed to scream, the drop higher than she'd expected, so high she thought she might have fallen right through the floor, fallen right into... She landed lightly, a pair of strong arms grabbing her from behind and reducing the shock. She leaned into them, happy to be held and not wanting to be let go. When she turned to thank Torp, though, she saw Marlowe instead. Ugh, she scowled at him, pulling loose. "Sorry," he said, backing away like a beaten dog. They were standing in a cavern. She had no idea how big it was because it was drenched in darkness, darkness so heavy and so deep that it felt like a physical thing. It seemed to press down on her, to put a cold hand over her mouth. To one side was the wall they'd just passed through. Every inch of it was covered in bones, the floor too. Herc's flare sputtered, spitting out an infernal red light. Now, she stopped, feeling something wriggling inside her throat. She hawked it up, spat, seeing the glistening body of a fat, squirming maggot slip between the bones on the floor. Her stomach tightened, her body trying to turn itself inside out. "Now what?" she managed, smearing her hand over her trembling lips. "We did not see this place," said the girl. Her voice, with its annoying accent, seemed like it came from a million miles away, as if they'd dropped to the bottom of the ocean. "We passed through a church, then a tunnel, then entered the stairs. This is new." "The liminal," said Herc. "The space between. The engine is surrounded by it. It's what keeps it out of reality, keeps it hidden." The space you pass through when you go through the red door?" Marlowe asked, his voice as muted as everyone else's. "No wonder I feel like my guts have been trampled by an elephant." He wasn't wrong. Pan flexed her jaw, something buzzing inside the skin of her cheek, and she imagined a clutch of flies had just hatched there. It was unbearable, and the only thing that stopped her firing a crossbow bolt into her own head was the fear that she might be stuck down here, trapped in the liminal for an eternity. The thought of that was somehow even worse than the thought of being taken by the demons. Herc's flashlight wobbled, and he gave it a slap, shining the beam into the heart of the darkness. It reached maybe 15 feet, then stopped dead, too afraid to reveal what lay there. "How far away is it?" Truck asked. "The engine?" Herc shrugged. "No idea. Time and space, they're different here. One way to find out, though." He set off, bones crunching beneath his boots. Pan adjusted her crossbow and set off after him. She was exhausted, everything drained. She wasn't sure she could even conjure up enough for a burst of charge. Something popped beneath her, and she looked down to see a skull. That used to be somebody's face, she thought, as she pulled her foot free, shaking the dust away. A sudden alien scream loosed itself inside her head, like somebody had split it open and was crying into it. She gouged her nails through her hair, breathing fast, the darkness a spinning vortex around her. In front, Marlowe doubled over, groaning. She grabbed his arm, as much to keep herself standing as him. They stumbled on together, Herc's flashlight a boat of light in the river of darkness. Behind them, the flare sputtered out. There was no way back. Not that there ever had been. You didn't start a mission like this expecting to retreat. "What is that?" said Torp up ahead. Pan could hear the fear in his voice. When she reached him, she saw that he was looking down at the ground, and something was moving there. One of the bones. It was vibrating, softly, barely noticeable, other than the buzzing noise it was making. It stopped, then started again, reminding Pan of a bluebottle trying to fly with torn wings. "I really don't like this," said Truck. "Come on," said Herc, hoisting up the duffel bag. "We got to keep moving." They'd only made it another few feet, though, before something else clattered over the ground. It was another bone, a small one that might once have been somebody's finger. It was jittering like there was an earthquake, bouncing a couple of inches, then lying still. "I really, really don't like this," said Truck. He stamped down on it, grinding it to powder. A voice up ahead, somewhere distant. It sounded like a man crying out in pain. Pan's skin crawled so badly she thought it was trying to slither right off her. "Someone's there," she said, pulling the crossbow from her back. It was loaded with a bolt, one that had been carved from the fabric of the engine itself. The metal was old, etched with runes, and it was powerful, especially against the undead. Fire one of these into a demon and it would be like it had swallowed a grenade. Then why did she feel so exposed and so helpless? Another faint cry, more bones scuffing across the ground as though they had minds of their own. Pam squinted into the darkness, no sign of anything. "Stay sharp," said Herc. "Anything is possible in here." They huddled together, insect small in the vast space. The shout up ahead was being answered by another that could have been a crow's caw. More rose up in the dark, a swelling tide of noise. These weren't the call of the engine, Pan understood. They were real. Something snatched at her foot, a cluster of long bones. It punched a grunt of horror from her throat, and she shook free, kicking the hand onto its back, where it trembled like a dying insect. This one was decorated with smudges of rust-coloured blood that looked centuries old. Truck swore. He was skirting around a skull that was moving inside its nest of bone, its lower jaw twitching wildly like it was telling a joke. A scraggy cap of blonde hair hung over its side. The big guy was smearing his palms down his t-shirt again and again. "Ignore it," Herc said. "Ignore the moving bones," Truck said, and Pan could hear the hysteria in his voice. "Yeah, his foot suddenly plunged into them, ankle deep, and his scream soared into the cavern like it was a trapped bird, fading fast. "God damn it!" He pulled his leg free and aimed the shotgun at the skull, firing off a blast that made Pan's ears ring. And in the flash of the muzzle, she saw something to her side, there and gone in an instant. "Herc, you're 3, she said, and Herc swung the flashlight. It looked like a huge, moonlit ocean over there, bone-white and restless. There was still no sign of the end of the cavern or the roof, but she could hear the endless, crashing crescendo of churning water. Water? "Oh, Jesus," said Marlowe. "That can't be." Pan stumbled on, unable to believe what she was seeing. The ground before her seemed more agitated with every step, bones writhing against each other, scratching at the air, at their legs as they passed. Some of the skeletons had scraps of flesh and muscle, like leftover meat on a barbecued rib. One of the skulls had an upper lip as fat and wet as a slug. It moved up and down in silent speech. Then she saw a face. A real face. It sat in the ground like it had been buried up to its neck, an old woman with patches of silver hair. The skin was withered and torn, one eye fused shut, but the other was a weak, watery grey thing that fixed on Pan and blinked furiously. The woman's mouth opened, and through it Pan could see the floor. Her scream was just a gust of dry air, but it felt deafening. Pan's terror was too big to fit up her throat, and she beat it back, forcing herself to stay numb. She felt a tickle of insanity in the corner of her mind, wondered how close she was to the abyss, to falling into that madness and drowning there. The closer she got to the ocean, the more she saw that there was no water here. It was a sea of flesh and bone, of things that could not possibly be alive, and yet were. Arms dug at the dirt, shedding fingernails in their desperation. Feet kicked at the ground, at the air, like the final awful movements of somebody trapped in a landslide. Limbless torsos twitched and trembled. And the faces, so many of them. They stared with red, bulging eyes, fat tongues sticking from their mouths as if they'd been hanged. They were obviously aware that they had company. Some of them cried, some of them called out in a language Pan did not recognise. Most of them screamed, a rising wave of sound that rippled outwards, surely loud enough to bring down the walls of the cavern, to bury them all forever. They screamed, and Pan put her hands to her ears, and screamed too. Herc kept moving, shaking off the hands that grabbed at him as he waded deeper into the ocean. Pan's foot slipped on something wet, and she looked to see a man's face there, gulping at air that he couldn't need, because he had no body. His eyes scrolled blindly back and forth. Sorry, she thought, but could not find the strength to say. There! Yelled Torp, his shout reduced to a whisper by the roar of the dead. He was pointing ahead, and when Herc shone the flashlight, Pan could just about see a column of rock stretching up. Pan set off for it, moving too fast. Something grabbed her leg and she was falling, landing in the grasping ocean of wet flesh. Her fist plunged into a decaying torso, one that squirmed beneath her, which pulled at her. She was face to face with a man who had only half a head, the bowl of his skull gleaming. His one eye rolled her way, and a toothless mouth moved against the air, like he was trying to kiss her. She tried to get up, but something was holding her tight, fingers sprouting from the earth and groping for her, a leg winding around her waist like a wrestler's, another fistful of fingers probing into her mouth, tasting of spoiled food and old blood, another yet in her hair. Filthy nails scraping her scalp. And the man, his lips searching for her, breathing on her with the stench of old meat, that one eye rolling madly in its puckered socket. The fire burned up inside her, too much of it for her to control. She closed her eyes and let loose a pulse of electrostatic energy, one that blazed out of her in every direction. The man's face erupted into ash, the ocean of limbs crumbling, freeing her. She pushed up, shaking the sparks from her smarting fingers. Her mouth tasted of copper, tingling like she'd bit down on a live wire. "Easy, Pan," said Herc from somewhere behind her, his voice jittery. She ignored him, moving as fast as her legs would let her, not caring that her boots were crunching through faces, not caring about the crack of breaking bones and the slap of wet meat beneath her. She just ran through the living corpses, through their endless screams, heading for that wall of rock. It rose from the living ocean, catching the swinging beam of Herc's light. She couldn't see to the top or anywhere near it, but she could feel how tall it was. The height was vertiginous, like she was standing in the shadow of the Empire State Building. There were openings in it, a collection of mouth-like caves running along the bottom. They looked like they might hold spiders, but they couldn't be worse than this. Nothing in all of hell could be worse than this. The countless, shrieking dead. The caves along the wall grew fast as she approached them, each the size of an apartment block. She stumble-ran into the nearest, the engine still pulling at her, still guiding her. Herc and the others were shouting, but she didn't care. She just wanted to be out of this nightmare. She felt that she would throw herself into the black pool, would gladly give her soul to whatever lay there, just to be free of this place. No light here. Just more groping fingers and howling mouths. She pushed on, the ground sloping beneath her, gently at first, and then hard. She lost her footing, sprawling, but the drop was too steep. The dead didn't have the strength to hold her. She rolled, bouncing between the moving corpses. She fired as she went, sparks of electricity exploding like a camera flash, glimpses of bared teeth and rabbit eyes. Then she was falling into something rabbit hole deep and lined with fury, a pit of snatching limbs and jaws. She reached for them, trying to halt herself, but she was going too fast. The hole was narrowing too, arms and legs slapping against her from all sides. The sound of their panic was like a choir of the damned, enough to reduce her brain to pulp. She would be buried here, buried alive, because she would not die, not in the liminal. She would lie here for the rest of light. Somewhere beneath her, just a faint glow. The forest of teeth and hands was silhouetted against it, everything still trying to grab her. It was working now too, trapping her full like a spiderweb traps a fly. She felt one of them bite into her arm, shouting at her through a mouthful of blood. She had stopped. They had her. She pushed downwards, clawing her way past the corpses like she was trying to pull herself from a tar pit. Another set of teeth grated the side of her head and she growled, almost losing herself inside an ecstasy of terror. They were tearing chunks from her. They were trying to devour her, but the light was growing. It was just there, just there. Gravity took hold of her, and she was out of the hole, falling again. She hit the ground, squirming onto her back, her heartbeat thrashing itself into a frenzy. Above her was a sloping ceiling of red rock, a fissure splitting it in two. Grey, bloodless hands explored the edges, and past them was the flash of teeth and bone and wide, frightened eyes. Groans and howls slipped after her, like they meant to pick her up and pull her in. She scuttled back as far as she could, until her hands gave way beneath her. Only then did she force herself to calm down, both hands on her chest as if she could massage her pulse back to normal. Her eyesight was boiling at the edges, but with each breath the panic subsided. "Get off me!" came a muffled voice. Then Truck tumbled from the fissure in the ceiling, landing with a splat. Marlowe and the young girl dropped out next, arms wrapped around each other, the big guy cushioning their fall. Marlowe scrambled up and out of the way, spitting, and Truck was halfway to his feet when Torp slid free, falling on him. "Oh, God damn it!" Truck yelled. "Let me get up!" Herc was last, screaming as he crunched down onto Torp and Truck. He rolled onto his feet, his breaths half pant and half scream. His eyes were drenched in fear, the eyes of a madman, and when he met Pan's gaze, she barely recognised him. Then the old guy blinked. Twice. 3 times. And each time he slipped further back inside himself until it was just good old Herc standing there. He sniffed, adjusting the straps of the bag on his back. "Everyone okay?" he asked. "No," said Truck. "No," said Torp and Claire together. "Not even close," said Marlowe, brushing the grime from his clothes. What was that? The French girl had been right. That had been a little slice of hell. "The engine needs death," said Herc, his voice still shaking. "It needs suffering. We all knew it. We all knew it would be bad." "Where are—" He stopped, and he actually smiled. Pan followed his line of sight. They might have been inside a cathedral, but one made from rock and flesh. The space they were in was the size of a football field, another vast underground cave. This one, though, was lit by torches. Thousands of them, mounted on the forest of pillars that filled the cavern. Each torch was set inside the mouth of a body mounted on the stone, their limbs seemingly fused there. The sight of it reminded Pan of Patrick Rabar, of what had happened to him back in New York, teleporting inside the ground and becoming a part of it. It made her shudder. Not as much, though, as when she realised that each of those poor souls had his eyes open. They stared down at her, their dirty faces marked by rivulets of tears, their mouths infernos that spat and crackled. The constant susurration of their blinking eyes was like a flock of distant birds taking off. The columns stretched up to a vaulted ceiling decorated with sculptures that might have been people. The walls, too, could have been red stone or could have been skinless bodies. Thankfully, none of them were moving. There was only one more thing in the giant space, embedded in the far wall. Something that filled her with fear, but which also flooded her mind with relief, because in the unimaginable horror of what they had just waded through, even something as rotten and wrong as this was still beautifully familiar. "Well, what do you know?" said Herc, walking to her side. "We only went and did it." "God, look at it," said Truck, appearing on her other side. "Just sitting there, all evil and stuff." "Wants us to open it," said Marlowe. "I can feel it." He was right. She could feel it too, a nagging itch right in the centre of her brain, and a graveyard voice that whispered, "What is it that you desire?" "So let's give the bastard what it wants," she said. And as one, they made their way across the cathedral to the Red Door. And the next chapter is called Home Sweet Home. Not so sweet, though. "Dibs on not being the one," said Truck, holding up his hands. "Same here," said Pan and Herc together. "What?" said Marlowe. Wait, that's not fair." They stood in front of the Red Door. It must have been happy to see them, because it was blasting out images that belonged in the sickest of horror movies. Images and sounds and thoughts that turned Marlowe's stomach. It seemed impossible that this was the same door they'd used back in Prague and Budapest, but there was no denying it. The same slab of patterned wood, the same glossy, lacquered paint, the colour of blood, the same antique brass handle, and the same gut-wrenching evil. "What about Mole? He didn't call dibs." "We do not have this dibs custom," said Torp. "Yeah, the Frenchies are exempt," said Herc. "Just do it, Marlowe." Marlowe reached out, then pulled back, like the door might be electrified. "I thought there was no way of opening it from the outside," he said. "Yeah, from anywhere else, no," said Herc, adjusting his bag again. "But this is the real door, and the real engine." Marlowe reached out again, his hand hovering there. "What if it—" "Oh, for God's sake," said Pan, barging past him and grabbing the handle. She twisted it, shunting it with her shoulder. It opened like Pandora's box, spilling a freak show of noise and terror into Marlowe's head. He balled his fists, let it ride over him. They were just images, after all. It was like a Disney show compared to what he'd just crawled through on his hands and knees. The door opened silently, smoothly, like its hinges had been greased. Whatever Marlowe had been expecting on the other side, this wasn't it. No engineers, no maman, just that familiar grey corridor stretching towards the elevator shaft. "Home sweet home," said Truck. The cacophony inside Marlowe's head had muted, but there was something else there, a noise he couldn't quite put his finger on. It was something industrial, something far away, something loud. He wasn't sure if he could even hear it or if he could just feel it, a thunderous tremor that ran up his bones and reverberated around his skull. It came again, and dust drifted down from the ceiling inside. He glanced at Pan and knew she heard it too, knew what she was thinking. This is something new. It came again, like artillery fire. It was definitely an explosion of some kind, and Marlowe couldn't help but think of somebody trying to blow open a vault door. Or trying to blow open the gates of hell. Pan walked through, one hand on the wall to brace herself. Marlowe followed, feeling nothing as he crossed the threshold. Why would he have, though? There was no need for the Red Door to teleport him this time. He'd just crossed the liminal on foot. But something weird was happening inside the pigeon's nest. Nothing seemed particularly solid. The walls were shifting, the movement too subtle to really see, just a flickering in the corner of his vision. The floor, too, didn't feel solid. The concrete passageway was pumping out a hum that made his teeth ache. "Just don't let your guard down," said Herc as he joined them. "This doesn't feel right." "This feels like a trap," said Top. "Too easy." It was too easy. Marlowe passed one of the swastikas painted on the wall, left over from when the Nazis had occupied the bunker during the war. Even as he looked at it, it vanished. Just for a second, then it was back like a video game glitch. He leaned in, putting his hand to it. The pattern of the concrete wall was shifting, scratches and scuffs appearing and then disappearing, He could make no sense of it. Was this the same thing that had happened back on the train? Maman making a building grow from the locomotive? He didn't think so, but how could he be sure of what was real and what wasn't? She's real, he thought, looking at Pan. If in doubt, just look at her. And he did, watching the way she leaned against the wall, the way she balled her fists to stop her hands from shaking. He saw the exhaustion there in every line etched in her face. She rubbed the scar on her chest, then spotted him looking and scowled. Yeah, she's real, all right. Keep your eyes open, Herc said as he walked past them, stooped beneath the weight of the duffel bag. He had his Desert Eagle clenched in one sweaty fist. Where are the engineers? Marlowe asked. I don't get it. It didn't make sense for Maman to throw all his engineers up onto the street. This corridor was the perfect place to defend. Narrow, just one way in. Maman could have rigged the whole thing with explosives and killed them all the moment they stepped inside. It's because we're too late, he thought. He doesn't need to fight us anymore, because the engines have been united. A peal of distant thunder again, from deep beneath them. One that made the corridor flutter out of reality for a moment, everything blurring. Marlowe's stomach did a loop like he was riding a roller coaster. Something was happening to the engine. They reached the elevator and Herc pulled open the gate, craning inside. You think it's safe? Pan asked, cradling her crossbow to her chest. Bloody thing has never been safe, he said, but I can't see any sign it's been tampered with. I don't think Maman would want to risk being trapped down there. Why is it up? Marlowe asked. Herc frowned at him. I mean, those engineers needed to get to the surface, right? Sure, said Claire. We came this way. But why leave it here? Why not pull the elevator back down and make it harder for us? Nobody had an answer. The world rumbled again, a buzz that seemed to rattle Marlowe's skull. Oh, there is no way in hell I'm going in there, said Truck. Herc daintily placed a foot inside the elevator, tapping his toes against the floor. Up to you, Herc said. Take the stairs if you'd rather. Truck glanced at the access door to the stairwell, frowned, then shook his head. Yeah, the elevator looks safe enough, he muttered. Herc went first, the cab rocking as he entered. Pan followed, the fear flowing from her in great big waves. Marlowe pictured the elevator coming loose, suddenly plunging into darkness, and it was because he didn't want to lose her that he stepped inside. There were grumbles as the others joined them, all except for Claire. She stood in the corridor, chewing her nails like she hadn't eaten in a month. Come on, said Marlowe. I cannot. Better in here with us than out there alone, right? But you do not know what he is like, she said. You have not seen him. Marlowe thought back to the fight outside his school. Maman had been an impossible shape of darkness pushing up the street, an icebreaker shattering its way through reality. And again, on the train, he'd torn the world apart, a glimpse of what was to come if the gates opened, if hell broke free. He is not human, she said. He cannot be beaten. He might not be human anymore, said Pan, but he can be beaten. We can crush his ass, said Truck. It is not just him, she said. His soldiers. Oh, we'll crush their asses too, Truck said. Come on, said Herc, his hand on the gate. Last chance. She backed away even more, hitting the wall. I'm sorry. Herc sighed as he pulled the gate shut and slammed the button. Marlowe put his hands on the grill, looking at the young girl outside. We'll be back, he said. Just wait here. You asked about your friend, she said. Charlie? Yeah, he's down there, right? The gates locked, the elevator starting its slow journey down. He is there, she said, but be careful, Marlowe. She walked to the gates, looking down at them. He is not like you, she said. He is like him. What? Marlowe yelled. He pushed the button, trying to make them stop, but the elevator kept moving. What do you mean? I mean, Maman is not the one who is uniting the engines, she shouted over the whine of the gears. Charlie is. He is the one who is bringing them together. Then she was gone. Marlowe spun to the others, their faces like Halloween masks in the half-light. What does she mean? He asked. He was answered by another booming pulse of not sound, one that pounded his internal organs. What does she mean? He said again, when the sensation had passed. You tell us, Pam replied. You tell us who he really is. Charlie. Just Charlie. Always Charlie. And there was no time to answer anyway, because the elevator began to slow, rattling to a halt on the next level down. Slowly the bullpen rose into view, the huge space buried in shadow. All but a handful of the lights on the ceiling had blown, but Marlowe could still see the stains on the concrete floor, dried, copper-coloured puddles that must have once been the engineers, been the lawyers, been Betty, been Seth. He swallowed a throatful of bile, but his rage pushed it back up again, choking him. How could Charlie have done this? They crunched to a halt, and Herc grabbed the gates. "You shoot first, you ask questions never," he said, his fingers flexing on the pistol. "Marlowe?" Marlowe remembered the gun, pulled it out. His palms were so sweaty he almost dropped it. Herc reached over, flicked something on the weapon. "Safety's off," the old guy said. "Just point and shoot." "Point and shoot," Marlowe repeated. Herc grabbed the gates and wrenched them open. Down here the thrum of the engine was worse than ever, each pulse like something had been detonated inside Marlowe's soul. He waited for Herc and Pam to move, then he stepped out into the bullpen. There was no sign of life, but most of the basketball court-sized room was cloaked in darkness, and anything could have been hiding there, watching them. "Oh, crud," said Pam. Marlowe followed her gaze to the side. The bank of supercomputers that sat there had been smashed to pieces, glass and metal and plastic strewn everywhere. It took a second for it to sink in, and when it did, he thought he felt his heart actually crumble to dust inside his chest. The computers were what the engineers needed to crack the contracts. Without them, they didn't stand a chance. "Doesn't make sense," said Truck. "Why haven't they busted Marlowe's contract?" Herc had pushed himself out into the dark like a boat leaving harbour. Even with the muscles, even with the gun, he looked too vulnerable out there. "Maybe they were worried we'd come back," he said. "Maybe they thought we'd take it back." "Hardly." The voice came from the other side of the room, a girl's voice, and the shock of it made Marlowe jump. He dropped the gun, and it clattered onto the floor. By the time he'd scooped it up again, some more of the bulbs overhead had blinked on, pockets of light appearing in the night. Each one contained a handful of engineers, all dressed in black. By the time the final light had spluttered to life, there must have been 20 of them. More, maybe. Marlowe held up the gun, and the sound of it rattling in his hands was the loudest thing in the room. "I wouldn't," said the same voice. The redhead stepped into a spotlight, brushing her hair from her eyes. She was bleeding from the battle on the street, and she looked as pissed off as ever. She still held one of her impossible blades. "Drop the guns, then put your hands behind your back. Try anything else, and it will be the last thing you do before the demons come to collect you." The engine pulsed beneath them, a vibration that made the whole room shiver, which made the light fittings swing. It was like they were in an air raid shelter, bombs raining down. Herc stood there with his gun, Pam with her crossbow, everybody armed, nobody moving. "Last chance," the redhead said. "Oh, we drop our guns, you kill us anyway," Pam spat back. "Might as well go out fighting." "If we wanted to kill you, we would have killed you," she shouted back. All around her the other engineers shifted uneasily. Their tension in the air was electric, making Marlowe's hair stand on end. Just how much power was in this room? And what kind of power? If every one of those engineers had traded for something, then they would be unstoppable. "On the train," the redhead said. "In the street. We could have killed you." "Oh, we kicked your scrawny ass on the train," said Truck. "Yeah," said another voice, a guy stepping out of the crowd. It was him, the magpie who'd pulled Night to her death. He must have teleported out of the other girl's body before they hit the ground. "Tell that to your little friend." Truck moved, fast, his fists clenched. Herc shot out an arm and grounded him, growling out an order. "You're too late anyway," the girl said, placing a calming arm of her own on the other guy. "The engines are united." As if on cue, the room shook with another bone-shattering pulse of sound, an almost subsonic howl like the entire planet was screaming. "I don't believe you," said Herc. "World's still here." The girl shook her head. "You really are that stupid," she said. "All this time and you still don't know. Mammon said that's what it was, but I didn't think there was any way anyone could be so deluded." "Look, this is nice and all," said Herc, "but you either tell us where Mammon is and get the hell out of the way, or you kill us. I'm old and tired, and you really are starting to piss me off." "Mammon is here," said the girl. "He's down in the engine. He would like to speak with you." What? Marlowe shot a glance at Pan and she met it, her thoughts carved into every line of her face. This has to be a trap. Charlie's there too, said the redhead, looking at Marlowe. He needs to show you something. Yeah, said Marlowe, the tremor in his voice echoing around the room. Show me what? The truth, said the girl. The stupid, awful truth. That you're about to open the gates of hell, said Herc. That you're about to drown the world in demons and fire. She shook her head. No, Herc. The truth that we're trying to save the world, she said. We're trying to save it from you. The truth. Bullshit. I can't believe I actually put a proper swear word in here. Bullshit. I had to say it twice. Pan's fury ignited inside her, bursting from her mouth as a scream and from her fingers as a blast of white lightning. It snapped across the room, whip crack fast, punching into the redhead and sending her tumbling backwards into the dark. She aimed her other hand and blasted out a second strike, this one aimed upwards. The lights exploded, a fireworks show of sparks ripping across the ceiling. Then darkness, punctuated by the blinding bark of Herc's Desert Eagle and the flash of Truck's shotgun. Somebody yelled in pain, in panic, the enemy engineers scattering. A pulse of burning plasma appeared from the shadows, crackling as it tore across the floor. Somebody fighting back. Pan fired again, blindly, then felt a hand on her shoulder. Get down to the engine, growled Herc. Take Marlowe. You two are the only ones with powers, the only ones who can beat him. Something swooped through the air above them, a dark shape that cried out with a human voice. Pan could hear Torp shrieking something in French, the sound of his assault rifle deafening. We'll hold them off the best we can, Herc said, firing another couple of shots across the room. Pan nodded, retreating. She backed into Marlowe and he grabbed her arm, both of them running into the open elevator. Pan! Herc yelled, his face a blur against the dark, his eyes two shards of steel. Whatever happens down there, whatever he says, just remember who you are. He ducked as another wave of plasma seared its way across the room, igniting somebody. Friendly fire. The enemy engineers were attacking one another in their confusion. Marlowe grabbed the gates and hauled them closed, pushing the button for the bottom floor. And Perk! And Pan! And Pan, Herc called after them. You'll never forget what you've done, yeah? You never forget that the world wouldn't be here without you. Then he was gone, his voice fading behind the grinding roar of the elevator. Pan reached for the button, wanted to drag it back up and join in the fight. She couldn't leave him, not Herc, not when he needed her. But her battle was with something else, something infinitely worse. She shook her tingling fingers, breathing hard. Marlowe was pacing from side to side like a caged tiger. We can't beat him, he said. We can't. She stood in his way and grabbed the scruff of his t-shirt, waiting until his big, frightened eyes met hers. The elevator rumbled downwards, ever downwards, carrying them right to hell's front door. The engine was summoning her, each pulse of sound a clarion call she felt in the flesh of her brain. Her fear was so pure, so bright inside her, that it didn't feel real. It would, though, she knew, when she came face to face with Maman. We can't, said Marlowe, trying to tug loose. You've seen him, he's too powerful. Marlowe, she said, holding him tight, you need to focus. On what? He shot back. On the fact that we're about to get killed, that we're going to get taken. The sounds of battle overhead had almost faded, plunging them into the closest thing to silence she'd heard for a long time. The calm before the storm, she thought, inhaling it, hoping that the sudden quiet would help calm her churning terror. We have to go back, said Marlowe, hammering at the button. We have to go get to the surface. Someone else will do this. Someone else will... She leaned in, without thinking, and kissed him, pushing her lips against his until his lips stopped moving. She didn't think it was possible for his eyes to grow any wider, but they did, his words drying up in his throat. He tasted of copper and mint, his breath heavy and hot against her tongue. He opened his mouth, and she made to pull back, but didn't. It just felt so good to be close to anybody, even if it was him. She rested her arms lightly on his waist, feeling him tremble, feeling how fragile he was. As if she pressed too hard, he would shatter like glass. He put his arms around her too, his fingers tickling the small of her back. They stood there, connected, for a small eternity. Then his tongue brushed against her lips and she reared back, wiping a sleeve over her mouth. The elevator was slowing, pulling her back into a world she'd almost managed to forget about. Marlowe put his fingers to his lips, as if there might still be a piece of her there. He was gulping air. "You were losing it. I needed to shut you up," she explained, turning away so that he wouldn't see her cheeks blaze. It worked. They shuddered to a stop, and she grabbed the gate, pausing for a moment. Beyond was the vault room, the last barrier between the world and the engine. The door was several feet thick, designed to withstand an atomic blast. It could keep out even the strongest of engineers. And it was open. "Maybe he really does just want to talk," she said, tugging at the stubborn gates. Marlowe gave her a hand, wrenching them open. He put a hand on her arm, and she shot him a look that made him let go immediately. "You started it," he said, but the fear had gone from him, that blind panic. He even managed to smile. "One more, before we die a horrible death and get dragged to hell. We make it out of this," she said, "then you've got yourself a deal." It was a safe bet to make. She was pretty sure they weren't getting out of this one. She took a step forward, then felt his hand on her arm again. When she turned, though, the smile had gone, and he was frowning. "Look, Pan, I should have mentioned this before." He cast a look at the vault door, chewing something over. "Charlie, I spoke to him back when he was in the infirmary. He said something." "What?" she said when he didn't continue. "He said that I needed to be careful because they were lying to me." "What?" she said. Maman had told her the exact same thing on the train. "Who's lying?" "He didn't say it. That's all he had the strength for." "It doesn't matter," said Pam. "Maman is the liar. Ostheim always called him the father of all lies. You shouldn't believe a word that comes out of his mouth, and if he got to your friend, then you shouldn't trust a word that comes out of his mouth either. Come on." But the doubt followed her into the room, nagging at her. They're lying to you. And why had Maman not just killed her there and then on the train rather than trying to talk? It just didn't make sense. She checked her crossbow, the first bolt loaded and ready to fire. If she had a lucky shot, if she buried it right in his rancid heart, then there would be no more lies. No more lies, no more fear, just relief. The thought of it was overpowering, propelling her across the room. She splayed the fingers of her free hand, the current dancing between them, waiting for its orders. The engine spoke to her in the language of hell, those same images flashing across her vision, burrowing into the meat of her brain. Death, torture, screams, flames, all so familiar now that she dismissed them with a grunt, forcing herself through the door. And there it was. The engine. She had never seen it like this, every one of its countless clockwork parts in motion. It looked vast, stretching from horizon to horizon, and lit by the 1,000 lights embedded in the distant ceiling of the cavern. And it looked alive, like it might just pull itself up, collect its scattered pieces, and haul its bulk out into the world. Something exploded deep inside the engine, a pillar of thick, red flame curling up and pooling in the hollows of the ceiling. There was a pulse of sound, of feeling, and the engine roared, the collective cry of billions and billions of cogs and gears and needles and springs. It roared loud enough to end her, to end the entire world. It roared so loud that she almost didn't see the figure standing by the black pool. Maman. He stood with his back to her, staring into the dark water. He could have been mistaken for a normal human being, except for the way his body seemed to shimmer, glitching from side to side like she was watching a video in fast forward. She knew it was him, though. He was kicking out an evil stink that made her soul hurt. She didn't hesitate, not for a second, knowing that if she did, she would never be able to move again. She started down the stairs, taking them two at a time, the crunch of her footsteps lost behind the world-ending groan of the engine. "Find Charlie!" she yelled back, feeling Marlowe on her heels. "I've got him!" No time to wait for a reply. She was already close to the bottom, the engine sprawling out to her side, its deafening orchestra of clicks like an army of insects about to swarm onto the rock and devour her. She ignored it, ignored everything except for him. Skidding onto one knee, she placed the crossbow to her shoulder. One chance. One chance. Do not mess it up. Maman was starting to turn, slowly. The shape of him wobbled and blurred, like he wasn't really there. But he was there, She knew it. She could feel it in the way she wanted to open her head with a hammer and claw out her brains. She could feel it in every screaming cell of her body as he turned to face her. Maman. The man she'd been trained to fear, trained to hunt, trained to kill. She fired, the bolt humming as it shot from the crossbow, arcing through the air, a flash of iron as it burned towards Maman's heart. He snatched out a hand and caught it. "Pan!" he said, his voice a skewer in her ears, puncturing her. She swore, thrusting out a hand and loosing a raging torrent of electricity. She didn't wait to see if it hit him, just strafed right, trying to fumble another bolt into the bow with her smoking fingers. "Pan, listen to me!" "No!" It slipped from her grip, rolling away, and she left it, pulling the last bolt loose. Maman was still standing there, sparks rippling over his body like they were trying to find a way in, trying to find a way to hurt him. He lifted a hand, and she felt something cold and dark in the air around her, felt herself rise from the ground. The raw sewage stench of him was unbearable. She twisted against his invisible grip, tilted the crossbow towards him. "Pan, stop! Listen to me!" She pulled the trigger. This time Maman wasn't quick enough, the bolt slicing past his face. She felt his hold on her loosen, and she crashed earthward, pain flaring in her knee as she landed. The crossbow skidded away, and she scrabbled for it. Something wrapped itself around her foot, yanking her back. Her face slammed against the floor, a tooth spinning away. For a moment there was nothing, her vision a series of dark, churning cogs, like she'd been thrown into the heart of the engine. She blinked hard, and the world snapped back on. She was still being dragged over the rough stone, something locked python tight around her ankle. Grunting with the effort, she managed to flip herself onto her back. Maman was 10 yards away and reeling her in like a fish. His body danced in and out of reality, his face shifting like a collection of photographs being shown at lightning speed. "You do not have to fight me," he said. "We are on." She punched another bolt of energy at him, this one weaker, but still enough to make him lift his arm in defence. It crackled into him, pushing him back, and she fired another and another. The grip on her leg vanished, and she forced herself onto her feet, loosing another attack. This one hit Maman in the chest, and he staggered away. His cry like a shrapnel grenade had exploded inside her head. Where the hell was the bolt she'd dropped? She fired another charge, pathetically small. Her body was running on fumes, but it didn't matter. She didn't have to fight for much longer. If she could just find it. There, near the stairs. She ran for it, Maman roaring behind her. She could feel the force of his voice like the shockwave of an explosion, and she almost fell again, her arms wheeling to keep herself upright. Another pulse howled its way from somewhere inside the engine, an enormous pillar of fire curling lazily towards the ceiling. There was no sign of Marlowe. More invisible hands trying to grab her. She dived, rolling out of their reach and snatching the bolt from the stone. No time to get the crossbow. She gripped the bolt and ran, willing the last few charges from her fingers. The air crackled with thunder. Maman weaved out of their way, his faces, a mask of fury. Then he was moving too, running right for her, shattering his way through reality. His mouth stretched too wide, so wide that he might be about to swallow her up, and he roared, a noise that could have broken every bone in her body. But still she ran. No charge left. She ran and ran, unleashing a scream of her own that had been building inside her for years, since her mum had turned her back on her, since Christophe had tried to take her, since the cops had arrested her and Herc had saved her, since she'd first heard Maman's name, since her first mission, since she'd stood by and watched all those people die, all of her friends. She screamed until there was nothing left inside her, and she ran until there was nothing left between them. He lunged for her, but she put her head down and tackled him. There was no air left in her lungs to be knocked away, but she still felt it in every tendon, like she tried to bring down a bear. They locked in a demented dance. She held the bolt like a knife, jabbing it into his flank, but his arms were around her, crushing. She had no space to move. His touch was cold, turning her blood to ice. His graveyard stench enveloped her, choking her. He squeezed harder, and she felt the vertebrae in her back creak, ready to pop. "Just stop!" Maman yelled at her. "Just stop! No!" She dug deep, deeper than she'd ever gone, and found something there. She grabbed hold of a handful of cloth and pulsed the last of her electrostatic energy into his ribs, a direct hit. Room to breathe, to move. She swung her hand around again, and this time the bolt found its target, sticking into the flesh of Mamon's side. It was like dropping a flare into a canister of gas, the force of the explosion spinning her away on a cushion of heat and noise. She landed on her back, skidding into the rim of the pool. Darkness. The overwhelming force of it trying to pull her in, trying to smother her. Get up, she told herself. She clawed her way out of it, her eyes bulging, her mouth hanging open. Maman was right in front of her, no longer a shifting mirage of faces, but a man. No, a boy. He looked younger than her, younger than Marlowe, curls of blonde hair falling over his eyes, his mouth twisted into a grimace of pain. The bolt stuck out of his side, and his clothes were smouldering there, tongues of flame licking up. "Just die!" Pan said. She'd meant it as a scream, but it came out as less than a whisper, just a breath. Just die. She tried to stand, found that she couldn't, and pushed herself onto the lip of the pool instead. Behind her the black water sat ink-thick and agitated, nothing reflected in its depths. "Pan," said Maman, and the sound of his voice almost sent her toppling back into the waters. It was a young boy's voice, high and trembling. "It's just a trick. It's just another lie," she told herself. She needed to push the bolt in deeper, right into the bastard's heart. It was the only way to finish it. She tried to move again, everything inside her drenched in pain. "Pan, no more," said Maman. He collapsed onto his knees, his coat billowing out around him. Gripping the bolt with one hand, he pulled. "You have to listen to me. You don't know what you're doing." She took as deep a breath as her busted lungs would allow. "I'm killing you," she managed. "That's what I'm doing. I'm ending this." "You're ending everything," he said. "You're ending the world. Please." He stopped, panting with the effort of trying to pull the bolt loose. "Please, just listen. I have tried to tell..." Where's my phone going? "I have tried to..." I should have put it on silent. "You're ending everything," he said. "You're ending the world. Please. Please, just listen. I've tried to tell you this for so long, but he would not let me. He would never let me. He's poisoned your mind, Pan. He's poisoned everything. Everything you believe in, and everything you think is true." "Who?" she said, finally managing to stagger to her feet. Out in the engine, another column of flame rose, illuminating the platform and Maman's face. The kid looked up at her with big blue eyes. Was he crying? "Ostheim," he groaned, spit hanging from his lips. "Ostheim, he has turned you against everything that is right. He's been lying to you. He's been using you. All this time you fought for good, for what was right. But how did you know? How could you know? You took his word for it." Despite the fire, everything inside her ran cold. "No," she said. "Ostheim is good. He's trying to stop you from bringing the engines together, from opening the gates." Maman shook his head, great fat tears rolling down his cheeks. "No, Pan," he said. "I never wanted to open the gates. I wanted to bring the engines together because it's the only way of destroying them." "What?" she said. "No, that's not true. You're a liar. You're nothing but a liar and a killer and..." The words abandoned her. There was no way he could be right. Could he? There was no damn way. Maman cried out, and the bolt came loose in a gout of blood. Pan steeled herself, trying to shake some charge into the ends of her fingers, but he just held the bolt up in one hand and threw it to her. It clattered across the stone, skidding into the raised edge of the pool. "I'm telling you the truth," he said as he clambered unsteadily to his feet. "I've always tried to tell you the truth. Ostheim is the enemy. He's been trying to unite the engines so that he can bring down the wall between the worlds, so that he can open the gates of hell. He's evil, Pan." He shuddered, patting at the flames on his jacket. His face was starting to buzz again, separating into pieces, but he made no move towards her. He just stood there, shoulders sagging, breathing hard. He's evil. He's always been trying to end this world, and for years now you've been helping him to do it. No. 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 She turned away from him, hands to her ears. No. It couldn't be true. It couldn't be. Ostheim, he'd always been straight with her, always sent her on missions that would help save the world. But were they? All those deaths, all those assassinations. What if Maman was right? What if she'd been killing off the good guys, the ones who wanted to save the world? Oh, please, God, no. She searched her head, but not one single thing, not one single memory contradicted his words. No. And she was crying now, her hands to her mouth. Maman was wrong. He had to be wrong. Because if he was right, then she was a monster. I'm sorry, Pam, he said behind her. I truly am. There was only one way to know for sure. Only one way to know the truth. Pan climbed onto the lip of the black pool, took a breath, and threw herself in. Where are we? I think that's probably enough. We've got, yeah, the next one. Yep, cool. We'll carry on with the next time, but that was a shock, wasn't it? Bit of a spoiler alert, that one. And then next time we should get to the end of part 2. I hope you enjoyed that with my special clarinet bonus. I don't know what that was. Anyway, yeah, I hope you're well. Hope you have a really lovely day. And I will see you very soon for some more Devil's Engine. And if you're lucky, some more clarinet. Sorry. Like I said, it's been like 30 years. Anyway, love you guys. See you soon. Bye.